Hello, I'm your mother. I am Janey Weiner Dann. I was born July 19th, 1936. As you also know, the hottest day on record in the city of Omaha at Methodist Hospital. It was probably 120 in that room. My mother delivered me. Which is why I dislike summer so much, but you kids all know that too. Winter is my season. Our family is an open book. When I was with you all this weekend and I told you what I was going to be doing today, I said it seems silly because you know everything. I've documented everything. I have trunks full of our heritage, and there is nothing new. There are no surprises. And you went, but Mom, there might be something you think of that we didn't know. And I said, well, good luck, because I'm sure everything I think of, you already know. However, Dr. Nachman wants me to do this for you, so we're ready. You know your grandparents, Bobby and Zadie Krautman, came from Mason City, Iowa. That was my mother, Rosa's parents. My Zadie there started the first and only synagogue in Mason City. It was 2 blocks from their house. We spent summers there, my 2 sisters and I. I'm the middle child, as you know. Older sister, younger sister. And my mother was one of 5 girls in Mason City, Iowa. There weren't a lot of Jews, but the Jewish boys from Omaha would get on a train and go up to Mason City, Iowa, because there was this plethora in one house of 5 beautiful Jewish girls. And so 8 or 9 Jewish guys would take a train up from Omaha and knock on the door, and I'll take this one and you take that one, and that's what my mother said her young dating years were like. That's how she met my father. Your grandpa and my grandfather, my Zadie in Mason City, owned a junkyard, and we loved to ride in the back of his truck. And when we were little kids, all have wonderful memories of spending summers in Mason City, Iowa. On your grandpa's side, on Iz's side, my father, his parents lived in Omaha, and so I grew up with grandparents here, which was a blessing, and we were very close, and they were Orthodox, so we spent a lot of time at the Orthodox shul as well as temple. Grandma, being Reformed, wanted us to be raised Reformed. So my Sunday school years were at the Reformed Temple, although on the high holidays we went with my Bobby and Zadie and 2 aunts, my dad's 2 sisters, you know, Aunt Sarah and Aunt Dorothy. And Aunt Dorothy was a single woman all of her life. Aunt Sarah, one of my father's sisters, had 1 son, so I only have 1 cousin on my father's side, you know, Len Potash, where I had many cousins on my mom's side, because being one of 5 sisters, and all marrying and all having children, we had a big family on mom's side. Okay, stop for a minute, because where do we go from here?
Name the aunts.
Aunt Nettie married Mo Robinson. Grandma Rose was the second of 5. She married, as you know, Grandpa is Weiner. The third was Dorothy, and she married Lou Lip, an attorney from Omaha, as you know. The next 4th daughter was Edith, and Aunt Edie married Uncle Sam Wolf from Mason City, actually. And the 5th and youngest daughter was Lillian. Maybe that's a surprise. You probably never knew Aunt Babe's real name was Lillian. Aunt Babe was the youngest of the 5, actually closest in age to all of us, and she is still alive. 2009. She is 92 or 93. She looks 70. She looks my age. She's wonderful. She's the last of the 5 Cropman daughters. She married Julie Davis, who's an attorney from Minneapolis. She still lives in Minneapolis, and we're still best friends. Growing up Aunt Babe has 2 sons, and growing up, she thought that was sort of unfair that her sister had 3 daughters. So I went away to camp in Minnesota from the time I was 9 years old, probably till 13. And then she and Aunt Babe and Uncle Julie would pick me up at camp in Minnesota and take me to their house for 2 weeks. So I really spent a lot of good quality time growing up as a young girl with Aunt Babe and Uncle Julie and those 2 little boys. That's a good, fun memory, and we have lots of pictures in the albums to show that. And I always loved Minneapolis. Came home, had wonderful, lifelong friendships. You know that Grandma and Grandpa were best friends with Ruthie and Mort Richards, so of course Suzanne and I grew up together from the time we were 3 or 4 years old. Nancy Barber Noddle. I have pictures upstairs in my office of Nancy and I at each other's birthday parties from 1938, 1939, even before the World War II broke out. We were best friends all of our lives, best friends, inseparable in high school. You've probably heard this story of Lillian Farber and Grandma Rose saying, "No, you 2 can't go away to college together. No, you've been inseparable for all these years, whatever, 15 years, 16 years. No." So the Farbers made Nancy go down to Lindenwood College in Missouri, and I went on to Indiana, as you know. And that was a very difficult year for Nancy. And we talked on the phone, and no cell phones, and wrote letters all the time. Came home after our freshman year, and she finally talked her parents into letting her transfer to Indiana. So Nancy came back our sophomore year in college. She was at Indiana when I met your father. And that fall, Lillian Farber came to campus, and I was dating your dad. And she met him before Grandma and Grandpa actually met him. And Mother called me a few days later, and said, "Lillian Farber came home and raved about this guy you're dating. Said she could only hope that her daughter Nancy would find a guy as sweet and wonderful as this guy that you're dating." Well, hello. I guess I agreed. Turned out to be your dad, 53 years later. That was college. Nancy and I quit after our sophomore year. We were going to go to Europe. We didn't really quit college. We just came home. We thought we were going to Europe that summer together. Had all the plans made, and then your father popped the question, came to Omaha, talked to Grandma and Grandpa, asked if he could have my hand in marriage. It was 56. And they said yes, and so instead of going to Europe, we got married. June 23rd, 1956. That takes, in high school, I worked. I always worked. While I was always a maverick, as you well know. When other girls were laying around Highland Country Club swimming pool, getting a tan. I got my tans on the weekends, but I always worked. I always wanted to have a job. I always wanted my own money. I always wanted to be independent. You know that about me. If anybody said, sum up your personality, I'd just say independent. Do my own thing. Figure it out my way. Had a wonderful high school experience for 4 years, went to Central. Hung out at the Jewish Community Center across the street from high school. That was a big plus. None of us were allowed to interdate, to date any boys that weren't Jewish. So that made it real easy to go over to the Jewish Community Center after school and all hang out before we caught the streetcar or the bus to come home. And get dates, which we did. It was a wonderful time to grow up in the 50s. The boys actually did ask us out. We did have dates. We didn't just hang in groups all the time. We dated a lot, and it was a great time to grow up. If people ask if I ever had any regrets about how I grew up or where I grew up or the decade I grew up, I would say definitely no, and my friends agree with me. We were as blessed as young kids could be. I was loved. I was spoiled to a degree. We had enough money. We didn't have too much. We were not overindulged. We got what we wanted. We were disciplined. My Zadie on my dad's side died when I was 7. I was standing by his bedside when he died in the hospital. He had cancer. I do remember that, but being 7, I also have wonderful memories of him. Otherwise, I had 3 living, wonderful, loving, caring grandparents. I think that makes a tremendous difference in how a child feels about themselves. The more generations there are to love you unconditionally, the easier it is to become a fulfilled person.
What kind of work did that grandfather do, Grandfather Weiner?
Grandfather Weiner came over at the turn of the century. My father was born in 1904. He came over from Russia with his older sister, who was born in 1902. The younger sister was born here in the States. He came over and he bought a hotel on 13th and Douglas. It was called the Millard Hotel. There's a long history of Millards, Joseph Millard and Ezra Millard, who were pioneers in the 1800s in the city of Omaha. And they had built the hotel. They sold it to my grandfather. He owned it and operated it. My father was raised in the innkeeping industry. The hotel burnt to the ground in 1933. It was a tragedy in the city of Omaha. 7 firemen were killed when the walls collapsed. My grandfather never rebuilt. He died 9 or 10 years later, but he still owned the ground. It became a parking lot down on 13th and Douglas. When he died in the middle of World War II, my grandmother, who never drove a car, ran the parking lot. She had a wonderful head for business. She was very bright. She ran the parking lot until she died of a stroke at the age of 87, I think. So she was quite a woman. My father bought his first hotel right before he and Grandma were married in 1931. And when they got married, it was the middle of the First Depression. And they lived in the hotel because they couldn't afford an apartment and a new business. And they lived behind the front desk. And my sister Lita was born in 1933 and came home from the hospital into that hotel. It's still standing today on 25th and Douglas. It was called the Fifth Avenue. It's now apartments. My father then bought a series of other hotels. He was always an innkeeper. He bought the Lee Hotel. He bought the Flatiron Hotel. He bought the Conant Hotel. So that's our history of innkeeping from the turn of the century. On my daddy's side, which was something else we were talking about this weekend when we were together in Dallas. Till the day Daddy died, at 90 plus, I always called him Daddy, and Mother, Mommy. And today, kids very early transition into Mom and Dad. It was something we were laughing about this weekend. When your father and I got married in 1956, we lived in Indianapolis. Your father went to work for a fraternity brothers family in Indianapolis. They were in the printing business. Your father had a degree in marketing. Your papa, my father-in-law, your daddy's dad, was in the women's clothing business, but it was a tiny town, Newcastle, Indiana. I was an urban girl. Your father thought he'd go into the ladies' ready-to-wear. Thank goodness he didn't, because he's precious, but he's never understood clothing, ever. So that wouldn't have been a good match. But I didn't want to live in Newcastle, Indiana. So we lived in Indianapolis, and I worked at the largest insurance company there, and your dad worked at this printing company. He was not happy. Grandpa in Omaha was looking toward retirement, wanted one of his children to come back and live in Omaha, proposed to us that we move back, your father go into the hotel business, and that's how that happened. It took us about 6 months to decide. I really never thought I wanted to live in Omaha the rest of my life either. Had great memories, but it just wasn't exciting enough. I wanted to live on either coast. I didn't care, California, New York, or Europe. I didn't care. I always had a wanderlust. Didn't want to go home and nest particularly. Well, haha. We were married 2.5 years. Found out we were expecting child number 1, and so Grandma and Grandpa really got on the wires and said, oh, having a child, you've got to come home. You know the advantages of raising grandchildren around grandparents. Come on, come on. So we did. We made the decision. Haven't really regretted it, although never got over my wanderlust. Went to hotel and restaurant school in Denver in the fall of 1958, where you were born, Wendy. The first joy, the first of 4 great joys of our life. December 2nd. Grandma wasn't going to come and help, and then she just couldn't stand it, and she said, well, Grandpa, of course, can't come, but I'll come and see this new baby and help you if you need me. And she came when you were 2 days old, and all of a sudden, when you were 3 days old, on the doorstep was a knock-knock, and there was Grandpa. Neither one could resist seeing you and loving you, and I know you know that's the way it's been all your life. We moved back to Omaha after actually just 1 semester in school at Denver University, because Grandpa's business was booming, and he decided that your father should learn on the job. He couldn't do without him, and he said, you'll just have to learn. Just come home. So you were just a month old when we moved back. Actually, it was January of 1959. And then A year later, Mark was born, the second joy of 4. Joseph, you know when you came, November of 1963, and then Robin Michelle in October of 1966. And I could have gone on, and that's when your daddy said, no, no, no. 4 were blessed, 2 boys, 2 girls, who in the whole world could ever ask for more. And I'm not a professional person. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an attorney. I don't know how I'll ever educate these 4 that we have. So this is it. This is the end. And he's probably right. I could have gone on. I could have had maybe 6. Anyway, you know it. You know what you mean to us. You kids were blessed. You had 4 living blood grandparents, all the way through your teenage years and some of you into your 20s. Completely unconditionally loved by all 4 of these original blood grandparents. It's an amazing heritage. My Bobby and Zadie Krautman from Mason City had their 50th wedding anniversary in Mason City, and at the hotel that your Grandma Rose was and Grandpa were married at in Mason City. That's where they had their 50th wedding anniversary. And then to go on, you know, Grandma and Grandpa had their 50th wedding anniversary. We went to California, back to their roots where they had honeymooned in San Francisco. That's where we held their 50th wedding anniversary. And then Grandma and Papa in Newcastle, your dad's mom and dad, had their 50th wedding anniversary at the country club in Newcastle, Indiana. And then you guys took us to that fabulous, fabulous resort down near the Ozarks for your dad and my 50th anniversary in 2006. So that's 4 generations of 50th wedding anniversaries, and we could only hope and pray that's a legacy that we have left you, and that all of you will be as blessed in every way.
I would like to hear, do you have any idea how the Weiners came to Omaha? How they ended up in Omaha?
Somewhere in my archives, yes, the family has documented. I do have a cousin by marriage who's gone through the whole family. There's probably 300 pages. I haven't read it all. He's a real historian, genealogy guru. I don't remember how they came. My grandfather, no, I don't. He had a brother who came a little later with my grandmother and my father and his older sister, my Aunt Sarah. His brother came at the same time, we called Uncle Bill. That was my Zadie's brother, Uncle Bill. He raised his family my Uncle Bill Weiner, he raised his family in Omaha. They still live here, my cousins from that side. I don't remember, I think their father was a barber in Minsk. I still have the barber tools. I still whack at my own hair with my great-grandfather's barber scissors that my father gave to me. That was his father's. I don't think any of them were in innkeeping, and I don't know why they came to Omaha. They must have known somebody from their hometown.
How about on the other side of the family,
And
your mother's side? How did they end up in Iowa?
I don't remember how they ended up. I wondered if I should have looked all that up, but it's there for you kids. I have the 2 antique trunks, and in those antique trunks are everything from everybody's Hebrew names to all their dates of birth, their deaths, their marriage dates. I do have that all. I suppose if you wanted it on a disc or a video, I could drag it all up. I could spend the winter researching it all. But it is there for you. I guess as you say, I've reinvented myself so many times and taken on so many different interests in my 73 years that I've never gone back into the genealogy. I just know it's there. I haven't studied it.
You mentioned before that you had gone to school in Denver, innkeeping.
Jerry did.
Did you finish that?
No, never finished school.
Did you use it?
Did I use the years I had in college?
The innkeeping.
Jerry did, because he went into, yes, Jerry did. He went to Denver University, but as I said, it was only a semester. And then he came home and learned hands-on. Grandpa needed him hands-on. And so, yes, you know, your dad was in the hotel and restaurant business for 30-some years of your growing up years. That piece of property from the original turn-of-the-century hotel that burned remained in the family in a trust that was named for this grandfather of mine, my Zadie. It was called the Zvi, you've heard me mention it before, the Zvi Chaya, ZVICHAYA, Zvi Chaya Trust. That was my Zadie's, your grandpa is his father's Jewish name, Hebrew name, Yiddish name. He wanted that piece of property left in trust after the hotel burned down. It was a parking lot until, 2004 maybe, when they wanted to build the Performing Arts, Holland Performing Arts on that corner. And then, by then, through the generations, it had gone through the trust. It was still in the trust, but the trust was diversified down through the many cousins. And we sold it out of the trust. The principals were deceased. The principals through up to your 2 sisters, my 2 sisters and I were deceased. We were the last 3 cousins, maybe 3 or 4 generations removed, 3 generations removed, and so we sold it, and it is now the Holland Performing Arts Center on that corner of 13th and Douglas. I don't know actually why any of them ended up in Omaha or Iowa. They really didn't have family preceding them. They may have had landsmen, they called them, from their small towns in Russia that had come previously. But they didn't have family. They were the first family.
I would like to hear about your sisters.
My oldest sister, Lita, married Chuck Lovinger from Yankton, South Dakota in 1954, and so they just had their 55th wedding anniversary. They have 3 sons, as you know, your 3 Levenger cousins, Jeff and Steve and Jay, which you are extremely close to. We raised you kids almost like siblings. There are a lot of funny stories we laugh about. We went up to Yankton every summer because they had a big house. They had a big boat. They lived on Lewis and Clark Lake. So we'd go up in the summers, so all you kids could spend time together. You were all approximately the same age. About every 6 months, either Lita or I had a baby every year. So these cousins, you had lots in common with these cousins. I remember packing the big hamper full of sandwiches and goodies for, let's see, they were 5, we were 6, so there were 11 of us on this big boat every day. For the week we stayed up there, and you kids would all sleep bunk style in the basement. And I remember once your cousin Steve running in the house and crying, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, so-and-so, the neighbor, he says dirty words to me, he's saying dirty words to me." And Lita and I are looking stunned and like what? And he said, "I see your cousins are here." And we waited, and Lita said, "So, what's the dirty word?" He said, he called the Dan kids cousins. That's a dirty word. She said, "No, honey, cousins is what they are." No, he thought they were siblings. He thought they were sisters and brothers. He was probably 4 years old, and he hadn't heard we didn't talk about give your cousin this or that. They just thought they were all siblings. It was a very cute story. But it does tell us all how much you meant to each other, and still do today, in celebrating your 50th birthdays all together, traveling from place to place. Yes. So we have traveled all over Europe. We have traveled all over Australia, New Zealand with Lita and Chuck. The 4 of us have been best friends for 50-some years. Chuck and your dad are like siblings. And you know that Lita's my best friend. We have a baby sister. She was 6 years younger. That made a big difference, that age gap. She married Larry Stern from Dallas. They have 3 children. Melanie was born about the same time Robin was, 1966. Jennifer came a few years later, followed by their son Josh. And they had a rocky time of it. They'd been divorced for many years. Larry remarried, as you know, lives in Italy. Betty changed her name to Betsy. She continues to live as a single person in Dallas. So you 2 sons and families that live in Dallas see her frequently. We see her when we go down. We spent the weekend with her as well as you all. What more can I tell you about my siblings? Jerry's siblings were very close. A wonderful Dan family story is that Mom and Dad Dan had 4 children, and each one of us had 4 children. So Mom and Dad Dan had 16 grandchildren. Grandma and Grandpa Weiner had 12. But Grandma and Grandpa Dan had 16 grandchildren. And when they both passed away, when Papa passed away and then Grandma, some years later, they left the lucky number 4 for us. They had had some financial reversals, and the will said, "We didn't have anything monetarily to leave you, But we left you a legacy of love, totally, and it's true, unconditional love. I loved my in-laws. That in itself is a beautiful story. And they left us the lucky number 4. So they asked that every 4 years, for the rest of our lives, or as long as we can possibly make it happen, we would have Dann family reunions. And we did. The first one was right after Grandma died in California. And since then, and next summer, 2010, we will have yet another Dann family reunion. I think this is maybe our 5th, and we try to do it every 4 years. We're up to 40-some people now, of course. Those 4 principals, thank goodness, are still alive. Your dad's 2 brothers and sister are in good health and still alive, and their children and their children's children, and we still make it happen. So you kids have been blessed on both sides, as you know. Okay, guys, we're going to end this. And Ben said, tell us a little bit about what you've done in your career. And I said, well, the kids grew up with that, so they know all that. You know everything I've done and why I've done it and how many times, as you say, I've reinvented myself. But I guess if you really, and I thought about this, wanted to know, who is that lady? What's the core of her? Who does she think motivated her to do all this, and what is she about? Maybe for your children and your children's children or whoever. I wrote it down because I can get off on tangents, as you know. Here's what I wrote. I've taken risks, but they've always enriched my life. I feel like I might have taken a risk by having 4 kids, but talk about enriching a life. And look who you brought. Now there's 8. Now there's 12. I was never afraid to take a leap, any leap, whether it was parasailing, and you know that, whether it was hot air ballooning, whether it was luging, whether, give me a risk, I'll take it. I wasn't afraid to leap because I really did always my best to anticipate the landing. I would look and I'd think very quickly, okay, worst case scenario, what could happen? So to me, taking that risk and then working backwards makes the leap easier. I'm not a tentative person, you know that. By being tentative and going inch by inch into a project or into a commitment, to me would make the anticipation worse than the medicine. So I'll take the leap first, and then I'll work backwards and make it happen. And if the learning curve is difficult, that's great. To me, it makes the end more rewarding. So if this makes sense to you guys, this is, I hope I have left you that strength of character, which I think I have, and you know, to the heights of the world, as unconditional as any love can be. That's what I have for you. Bye-bye.